A terrifying letter said to be written by Jack the Ripper himself. A young Belgian resistance fighter wrote haunting last words before execution, and Benjamin Franklin received secret letters that, when published, caused outrage and helped push America toward revolution. These are disturbing letters from history that changed lives forever. In September of 1888, the Central News Agency in London received a 2-page letter written in red ink. It was also full of spelling mistakes. It started with the words, "Dear Boss," and went on to taunt police, who were struggling to catch the killer stalking Whitechapel. The writer bragged, "I keep on hearing the police have caught me, but they won't fix me just yet. I shan't quit ripping them till I do get buckled." The author also promised to, quote, "clip the ladies' ears off and send to the police officers just for jolly." At first, they thought this was probably just another prank. Plenty of fake letters had been flooding in from people wanting attention, but a few days later, another victim was killed, and part of her ear really had been cut off. So suddenly, this letter didn't look like a hoax anymore. The police made copies and plastered them across London, hoping someone would recognize the handwriting. Newspapers ran the full text, and for the first time, the world saw the name scrawled at the bottom, "Yours truly, Jack the Ripper." Up until this point, the killer had only been known as the Shadow in Whitechapel, but now he had a name. Not that that really made a difference in the end. We all know how the story goes. In October of 1944, a 19-year-old Belgian resistance fighter named Norbert van Beveren was about to be executed by the Germans in Munich. Just before he died, he was given the chance to write to his parents. Well, he told them he felt a kind of peace, knowing his death would serve a purpose after all, that his family would soon no longer have to live under occupation. Sadly, though, the letter never reached his parents. His father had already died, and his mother just never received it. So for decades, the family didn't know Norbert had written any last words at all. But decades later, his great niece heard his words for the very first time when they were read on Belgian radio. She said, "My heart stood still. I sat there, shaking, my hands trembling. It means so much to me. It will not be forgotten." Norbert wasn't the only one. Around 1,500 Belgian resistance fighters wrote final letters like this before facing a firing squad. About 20 of them have recently come to light, thanks to the Last Words Project, which has been digging into attics and archives to try and piece together what these people wrote in their final moments. Historian Danny Newt, who helped launch the project, said, "War brings out the worst in people, but also the best in humanity," and that is what you see in the stories of resistance. In 1772, Benjamin Franklin was living in London, working as deputy postmaster for North America, when this mysterious package arrived. Inside were about 20 private letters written by Thomas Hutchinson, the royal governor of Massachusetts, and a few other officials as well. Hutchinson was basically telling the British government that colonists couldn't handle the same rights as people in England, and one of them, he even suggested cutting down, quote, English liberties. Franklin realized how dangerous these were, so he sent them to Boston, telling Patriot leaders to keep them quiet. But the letters somehow ended up splashed across the pages of the Boston Gazette. When the letters hit the press, people in Boston just lost it. Crowds built dummies of Hutchinson, dragged them through the streets, and set them on fire. In London, there was chaos too. People were so worked up over who leaked the letters that it even led to a duel. Franklin finally stepped forward, admitting that he had passed them along. He lost his job, but by then the damage was done. Those letters lit the fuse that helped push Boston toward the Tea Party and eventually revolution. Here's one of the strangest mysteries from medieval England. In 1878, a French archivist came across a letter that completely rewrote the story of Edward II's death. Officially, Edward was forced off the throne in 1327 and killed at Berkeley Castle. But this letter, written around 1337 by a priest named Manuel Fieschi, claimed otherwise. According to him, Edward never died in that prison. He actually escaped. The letters said Edward swapped clothes with a servant, killed the gatekeeper, and slipped out of the castle unnoticed. From there, he hid at another castle for about 18 months, then spent time in Ireland, eventually made his way through France to Italy. Fieschi even claimed Edward visited the Pope on his journey and lived as a hermit in a monastery. And there are some clues that actually point to that being true. For years, people had talked about a medieval tomb in the area that had been rumored to belong to a king. Plus, in 1338, Edward III, Edward II's son of course, reportedly met a man in Germany known as William the Welshman, claimed he was actually his father. It's possible this really was Edward II in disguise. Back in 1567, a stash of letters in a silver box turned up that basically ruined Mary, Queen of Scots. They're known as the Casket Letters, and they were used as the key evidence to prove Mary was involved in a plot to kill her husband. The letters were said to be written by Mary herself to the Earl of Bothwell, the man she later married. In them, she supposedly gushes about her love for him and talks about getting rid of her husband, Lord Darnley. The letters were put forward by her enemies in Scotland to paint her as a villain, using them as justification to force her to abdicate the throne and later throw her in prison. But no one's ever been able to really prove they were real. It's very possible these letters were forged, but regardless, those documents sealed Mary's fate and kicked off a long chain of events that eventually led to her being executed by Elizabeth I. When Christopher Columbus got back from his first trip across the Atlantic in 1493, he didn't waste time bragging about what he'd seen. He wrote a letter that was copied and spread all across Europe. In it, Columbus described the islands that he'd landed on, the people he met, and all the resources he was just so excited to exploit. He wrote about the natives being, quote, timid and full of terror, but also easy to convert and, in his words, fit to be ordered about and made to work. Columbus then went on about the fertile land, gold, spices, and how these new territories could make Spain rich and powerful. Copies of it were printed in multiple languages within months, making it one of the first kind of viral pieces of writing in history. It's crazy, though, just how casual he was in these letters about wanting to enslave the natives and take their land. He framed it all as opportunity. Obviously, though, this totally changed the course of history. In January of 1917, right in the middle of World War I, British intelligence intercepted a coded message from Germany to Mexico. It was sent by German Foreign Secretary Arthur Zimmerman. The telegram promised Mexico that if they joined Germany's side and attacked the United States, they'd get Texas, Arizona, and New Mexico back once the war was won. So imagine reading that as an American. The British cracked the code and handed it over to the US, but there was a problem here. If they just admitted they'd been spying, they'd of course expose themselves, so they had to find a sneaky way to make the letter public without actually revealing how they got it. President Woodrow Wilson finally released the telegram in March of that year. Americans were outraged. Newspapers splashed headlines about how Germany had tried to drag the US into war, and Arthur Zimmerman himself later admitted the letter was real. He said at a press conference, quote, "I cannot deny it so." But this single telegram played a huge role in tipping the US into World War I just weeks later. During the Civil War, a widow named Lydia Bixby was said to have lost 5 sons in battle. President Abraham Lincoln was asked to write her a letter of condolence, and it went on to become one of the most famous letters in American history. It begins, "I have been shown in the files of the War Department a statement that you were the mother of 5 sons who have died gloriously on the field of battle." The letter goes on to praise her sacrifice and offers Lincoln's, quote, "thanks of the republic they died to save." There's a lot of shady stuff surrounding this letter, though. For one, it was later discovered Bixby may not have lost all 5 sons. Some survived, some may have just deserted. That means the tragic story Lincoln was told might not have been true at all. On top of that, there's debate over whether Lincoln even wrote the letter himself. Some think it was written by his secretary, John Hay, whose style kind of matches the wording more closely. Still, the Bixby letter became legendary. Copies were reprinted everywhere, and this letter was a major inspiration for Saving Private Ryan, so I gotta thank it for that. In 2005, the Kansas School Board held hearings about whether intelligent design, the idea that life is just too complex to have evolved naturally and must have been created by a higher power, should be taught alongside evolution in schools. The debate got heated, and for a while, the board actually approved the curriculum including it. That's when Bobby Henderson, a young physics graduate, fired off a public letter. He said, "If intelligent design gets class time, so should his belief that the universe was created by a flying spaghetti monster." Henderson wrote, "I and many others around the world are of the strong belief that the universe was created by a flying spaghetti monster. You may be interested to know that global warming, earthquakes, hurricanes, and other natural disasters are a direct effect of the shrinking number of pirates since the 1800s. Of course, this letter was pretty funny, it was shared online, and it kicked off the whole Pastafarian movement. In 1917, British poet and soldier Siegfried L. Sassoon, who'd already been wounded twice and earned the Military Cross, refused to go back to the front lines. Sent a letter blasting the war, saying, "I believe that the war is being deliberately prolonged by those who have the power to end it." The letter spread fast. It was printed in the Bradford Pioneer on July 27th of 1917 and reprinted in the London Times a few days later. It was even being read read aloud in the House of Commons. Now, rather than face a court-martial for refusing to go back to the front lines, Sassoon was declared mentally ill. He was sent to a hospital for shell shock. But this basically let him stick to his protest without going to jail. All that said, I've been your host James, and I'll catch you, yes you specifically, in the next video.